The story begins with a world full of monstrous creatures. The government began to implement a policy of expelling foreign objects and monsters on a large scale. People called this practice monster cleansing. The young man who became known as the Demon Slayer now works in a circus. He doesn't actually work in a circus, but in an arena that used to entertain people. In the present day, we see that the leader of the circus has accidentally bought a captured goblin to use as a circus performer. In fact, in this circus, most of the performers are not human but demons and monsters. The next morning after the goblin has been obtained, we see the Demon Slayer going for a walk. On the way, he ended up being followed by a group of children. To scare them, he made a threatening move, and the children ran away in fear. After that, he bought a nice bottle of beer. During the walk, he saw some people beating up a poor animal, a cat. People believed that the cat was a demon in disguise, so as the Demon Slayer was nearby, they asked him to solve this problem. But he realized that it was just an ordinary cat, so he didn't attack it. Instead, he just ran it off. Although people like to see him fighting monsters, they are afraid to be near him. After all, even if he kills monsters, he's still one. That same day in the evening, he took to the stage again to perform. Coincidentally, the cat he had seen earlier appeared, but this time it really was a monster. After the performance, he left the stage and realized he was being followed. The follower this time was a girl, but she ran off. Not finding her in the room, he caught her by surprise. Curious, he wanted to know what was inside the cage she was carrying. When he tried to approach her, she reacted immediately by pulling out a gun. He wasn't intimidated by this toy and quickly approached her, managing to disarm her and easily overpower her. It was then that a voice from inside the cage asked him to spare the maid's life. The girl, realizing she was at a dead end, put the gun away and held the cage back. The voice inside seemed to know who he really was. The voice knew that the Demon Slayer was actually a half-demon, the result of experiments in which a demon was literally implanted in his body. That's why he was constantly struggling to keep his sanity. To make matters worse, using his demon power on a daily basis accelerated the process of being consumed by sanity. Knowing his situation, the voice inside the cage proposed a deal. When the cage was opened, it was revealed that the voice was that of a girl called Aya, only her head, as she is immortal. She explained that she needed his help to end her immortality, and in return, she would give him a way to prolong his life. Aya says that she has lived for more than 900 years, and that only demons could annul her immortality. However, the one who hurt her was a half-demon, and his power wasn't enough to kill her completely. A year ago, her body was stolen by another half-demon. She couldn't see his face, but she knew that he was commanded by an old foreigner who used a cane and had a hoarse voice. Now she was looking for this man. Although she was uncertain whether Shinachi would be able to kill her since he is only a half-demon, she still decided to ask for his help. Shinachi, who I'll call Shin, suggested that they go somewhere else to discuss the matter, as it would be problematic if the theater owner saw them together and forced them to perform again. During the conversation, Aya asked why he insisted on living, knowing that he would soon be consumed by demon. He admitted that he knew that, but he wanted to die in a way that he found amusing, by turning into a demon during a performance. It would be at that precise and beautiful moment that he could attack all the people who had always seen him as a simple source of entertainment. What's more, he wanted to see how many people he could kill before he was completely stopped. However, on hearing that there was a way to prolong his life, Shin gave up on the idea. He also told Aya that he wouldn't kill her because he knows that deep down she doesn't really want to die, but was just bored with living as a head without a body. Even so, he was willing to help her get her body back, especially since the man who stole her body was the same one responsible for its current state. Aya mentioned that her body was in Europe, so they would have a long journey. As for the way to prolong his life, she revealed that he would need to consume a part of her body. As this wasn't possible at the moment, she proposed that he ingest some bodily fluid. She asked him if he preferred her sweat or her saliva, and he chose the more amusing option, her saliva. So they sealed the deal with a kiss. Meanwhile, in France, two vampires, father and son, were hunting deer. Okay, they're not hunting your friend, they're hunting real animals. The father tried to use a gun to hit the animal, but as he couldn't keep up with its speed, he ended up catching it with his hands. His son asked why he had taken a gun if he didn't know how to use it, and his father explained that it was a gift from the mayor and that he needed to test it. It turned out that since the death of Count Dracula, vampires had begun to interact with humans, as living alongside them seemed safer than facing them. Back at home, the son asked his father why he kept silver items, and the father replied that it was to prevent other hunters from using these weapons against them. Upon entering the warehouse, the leader of the family found a silver bullet stained with vampire blood. As a result, he began to search frantically for family members. He found the eldest son and the butler, who told him that his wife was in the bedroom and the youngest daughter was singing to the maid. There were no signs of intruders, but when he got to the bedroom, he was devastated to discover that his wife was dead with a bullet wound. A few days later, journalists started showing up at his house. He was Count Gode, and having lived for 20 years without drinking human blood, he had the rights of a normal human. However, there were still people who refused to accept their presence. Now surrounded by journalists, he initially didn't want to give any statements to the press. But a young woman called Annie, who was also a journalist, asked what he intended to do about the case. It was then that he decided to hire a detective, as he didn't fully trust the police. When journalist Annie heard about the hired detective, she suspected it was the duo Aya and Shin, who are now famous for investigating and solving monster-related cases. Then the Count confirmed that it was them, and although their identities and origins were somewhat mysterious, Aya and Shin were more trustworthy than the police. The scene then cuts to Aya and Shin being taken by carriage to Count Goddard's house. During the journey, Shin began to negotiate with the coachman, complaining about the bumpy ride and trying at all costs to reduce the fare. Aya asked him to stop bullying the poor man, but Shin insisted and managed to reduce the price by 1 coin. However, as he had no money, he sent the coachman to collect from the Count. Thus we see the coachman entering the house crying, saying that he had been bullied. The Count patiently asked the butler to pay the difference. When Shin introduced himself to the Count, we see the Count shocked to hear Aya's voice. At first, he thought it was the maid Shizuko speaking, but Aya asked Shizuko to put the luggage away, confusing the Count even more. When work officially began, Shin revealed that Aya unfortunately only had her head, but that she shouldn't be underestimated because of this. Aya then asked the Count to recount the crime scene. He took them to the room where his wife had been murdered. As vampire bodies decomposed quickly, his wife had already been buried, but there were still photos of the incident. The images showed that she had been stabbed in the heart with something like a stake. There were no signs of a struggle on her face or body, indicating that she was probably asleep at the time of the attack. The killer managed to stab straight through the heart without leaving any marks on the back of the chair, which proves that the killer is someone very experienced. Another detail was the bottle of holy water left at the scene with blood stains on its mouth. There was also the silver stake found in the storeroom, a place only the Count and the butler had a key to. Unfortunately, vampires can't touch silver without burning themselves, even through a cloth. Aya analyzed all these details and pointed out 7 important points. 1. The killer must be someone close to the victim, able to go unnoticed by their heightened senses. 2. The crime was committed at night when vampires are weaker, during the day. 3. The lock on the storeroom was found broken, but because the bottle of holy water was left behind. 4. How the killer knew about the existence and exact location of the silver stake. 5. Why the killer returned the stake to storage. Just as Aya was about to reveal the last 2 points, the Count began to feel dizzy. Just then, his youngest daughter appeared looking for him, but was quickly chased away by Shin. Aya then decided to postpone revealing the last points and suggested that everyone have dinner with the Count's family. At dinner, the coachman was also invited, although he was suspicious and surprised that Aya only had 1 head. During the conversation, we discovered that the Count's family drank blood to stay strong while the other guests had normal dishes. Aya, however, didn't need to eat. The Count, despite considering detectives eccentric, still believed in their abilities. Continuing with dinner, Aya demonstrated her deductive skills. She commented on the coachman's situation, noting the details in his appearance. From the faded stains on his shirt, she concluded that he often spilled food, something completely common in alcoholic people. His beard and tidy shirt showed that he was trying to change for the sake of his wife, who looked after him despite his drinking habit. The coachman says she's right, and the Count is finally convinced by Aya's observation. The Count's eldest son even compared her to the detective Sherlock Holmes of fiction, who exists in this world. Then Aya asked for more details about the case. The Count's wife's body was found at 1:30 a.m., and the family had a habit of eating dinner at midnight. At 12:30 a.m., the Count's wife finished eating and went to her room to rest after the meal. The Count went to the library to meet his eldest son and discuss the administration of the city. The youngest daughter was also there, and then the Count went hunting. Before leaving, he went into the storeroom to get his equipment, and so far nothing seemed out of the ordinary. When he left, his second son asked to accompany him, and the 2 of them stayed together in the forest until they returned. During the hunt, he fired 3 shots at a deer, but 1 missed. The eldest son heard these 3 shots from where he was. After his father had gone hunting, the eldest son returned to the reading room and sent his sister to be watched by the maid. Aya then asked his son what he had done in the time between finishing his meal and going hunting. He quickly reacted suspiciously, protesting the question. But Aya insisted, if he had nothing to hide, why was he so nervous? The second son finally admitted that at 1:30 a.m., he was only in his room and didn't hear any noise. Aya also questioned the maid about what she did between 1:30 a.m. and 1:30 a.m. Note: this appears to be a repetition in the original text. She explained that she was cleaning the house and that during this time, her youngest daughter was bothering to distract her. The maid played with the girl until 1:30 a.m., but she said that she left to go to the bathroom for a couple of minutes before returning. The youngest daughter confirmed this story. As for the butler, he claimed that he was organizing the count's schedule and that he remained alone during the entire period. After listening to the explanations, Aya realized that the eldest son and the butler had no solid alibis, and this reinforced the suspicion that the murderer could be someone from this house. Aya had a clear reasoning. If the culprit was an outsider, how would he have managed to act without being noticed by all the vampires? The youngest daughter, unaware of the tension, ran out of the room, which made the maid chase after her. Aya then asked Shizuko to monitor the two employees while she continued her investigation. Aya later spoke to the eldest son, who denied any involvement. He was indignant, saying that he would never hurt his own mother. Aya, however, didn't think he was guilty. During the meal, she had observed the hands of everyone present. The three vampires in the house were unharmed, which meant that they couldn't have held the stake. But the question still remained: where was the stake? Meanwhile, Shizuko continued to monitor the butler and the maid. It was around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and the butler wanted to go back to work, but Shizuko stopped him. The maid mentioned that the Count and Shin had gone off into the forest, which made the butler visibly uneasy. In the forest, the Count was telling Aya about a creature that was supposedly immortal and had lived for over 1,000 years. Aya revealed that this immortal creature had a weakness: demons. But although they could kill immortals, demons had weak defenses and could be killed with a single bullet. The Count realized that Aya and Shin were talking about themselves. Understanding that their secrets were exposed, they stopped disguising themselves. Suddenly the group was ambushed. The Count quickly turned off the lights and pursued the attacker, capturing him easily. Initially, the Count believed that this person was responsible for his wife's death, but Aya asked him to spare the attacker. Upon inspecting him, Aya noticed that the sleeve of his shirt was covered in coal dust, indicating that he had spent a long time on a train. The man revealed that he was there to avenge a hunter who had been killed by the Count. He admitted that he had attacked the Count first, and that the stake he was carrying wasn't even made of silver. Aya then asked the Count to release the man, claiming that he had already learned his lesson. This situation helped Aya to reinforce her suspicions, and that now they no longer needed to search the forest. Back at the house, Aya gathered everyone together and announced that the murderer was among them. The eldest son protested, but the Count asked Aya to present her evidence. Aya then went over all 7 points of her suspicion. Firstly, the killer was a close acquaintance able to fool the Count's senses. Secondly, the killer acted at night even though vampires are weaker during the day. Thirdly, he left the bottle of holy water at the scene of the crime. Fourthly, the killer knew the castle's routine and workings well. Fifth, the killer deliberately left the silver stake in the storeroom, serving as a false clue. Sixth, the sound at the crime scene. When the Countess was murdered, her eldest son and the butler were near her room, but they didn't hear anything, which was rather strange. And although they had no alibi, it was unlikely that they were accomplices. This led Aya to suspect that the murder had taken place before 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The killer must have used something to muffle the sound of the stake being driven in. The crime scene had only one coat, which indicated that the killer may have used only the force of his wrist to drive in the stake. But why didn't the culprit use a hammer, even though hammer noises were not uncommon, as the Countess always repaired furniture? Perhaps the culprit feared that the hammer would damage the stake. This led Aya to conclude that the stake used at the crime scene was not made of silver. The silver stake found by the Count in the warehouse could have been stained with blood as part of the act. So what material could cause the Countess's death and still be fragile enough to break with a hammer? Aya left this question aside and moved on to the seventh suspect. The bottle found in the Countess's room being the bottle that supposedly contained holy water. The bottle was dirty on the outside and didn't look like it had been used to hold real water. If it had been filled with water, it wouldn't have been dirty. Aya concluded that the bottle was another false clue placed at the scene. But the Countess's wound showed signs of having been damaged by holy water. From this, Aya deduced that the culprit must have frozen the holy water in the form of a stake in order to commit the crime. The culprit wore a coat to the scene to avoid blood splatter, and the ice stake melted quickly, leaving only the injury to the Countess's skin. The culprit took the Countess's blood and waited for the Count to go out hunting. Afterwards, the culprit went to the warehouse and staged the crime scene to make it look like the murder took place after 1 o'clock in the afternoon and not before. That way, the person without an alibi between half midnight and 1 o'clock would be the main suspect, and only 2 people fitted that profile, the maid and the second son. However, the culprit needed to be strong enough to drive a stake through the Countess and also have time to create the fake scene, so the second son seemed to be the most suspicious. When confronted, the second son argued that because he was a vampire he couldn't hold silver stakes or holy water. That was true, but if the culprit had cut his own hand and let the wound regenerate, that would be completely different. Based on this, Aya concluded that the second son was the murderer. He became nervous and attacked Aya but was quickly restrained by Shin and thrown out. Aya explained that the motive for the crime was the second son's hatred of humans. He didn't agree with the Count's stance on making alliances with humans, so he set up the whole situation to provoke a crisis. He must have been the one who contacted the hunter and created an opportunity for him to attack the Count. He also stole the iron stake and the container used by the hunter, and as the family attended church, he easily obtained the holy water, which was placed in the container and left in the forest the night before to freeze. The finalization of this crime she has already explained to everyone. Moving on, the second son tried to attack Shin, but he was completely defeated, and while beating up the second son, Shin even told him his entire biography. After everything was settled, Shin went back to Aya. Aya and Shin were now ready to leave when at dawn the young journalist, Annie, showed up. She already knew the group and knew that Aya was just ahead. The journalist asked about the case, and Shin suggested that if she wanted to know more about everything, she should ask the butler. After that, we see Shizuko and Shin chasing each other again. Aya asked the Count if he was all right. He had lost his wife and now a son, and in the midst of this difficult situation, he still had to reveal the truth to the world. A very difficult situation for him. Before leaving, Aya asked about a man using a walking stick. The man said that he had met him recently and that he had been invited to London, but he had turned him down. With this new lead, Aya and Shin continued on their journey. Meanwhile, on a train, 2 new characters appeared. One of them with white hair was known as the Phantom of the Opera, and the other, a blonde woman, asked the Phantom to steal a diamond from a London museum where Sherlock Holmes was working. The Phantom accepted the job, and at the same time Aya and her group arrived in London. According to the English press, the master thief Lupin was the one who had hired the Phantom of the Opera. Journalist Annie also followed them there, and Aya's group went into a store to request a list of customers. When they left and entered an alley, 2 men tried to steal the customer list Shin was carrying, but suddenly they were intercepted by the police and taken to a car where 2 twins were also being held. Aya and one of the men recognized the twins as thieves due to their red wrists and the steel under their fingernails, indicating that they were carrying heavy ceramic items. The deduction was correct, and one of the twins ended up confessing. The newspaper reported that a figure known as the Iron Man was hiring detectives to investigate the thief Lupin, who was planning to steal his treasure. Coincidentally, the 2 detectives hired were Aya and Sherlock Holmes himself, who were now traveling together in this vehicle. When the police realized what was happening, they turned the car towards Iron Man's mansion. At the mansion, we learned that Iron Man himself and his butler had set a new record for flying around the world in 80 days, and Annie, who was now outside the mansion gate, was overjoyed to see the 2 famous detectives at the same time. The opera ghost also heard about this news. When they met Iron Man, he wasn't so surprised to meet Aya, as he had already heard about the existence of immortal people. Aya, on the other hand, said that she only investigated cases involving monsters, so perhaps this case wouldn't be of much help to her. But to the man in front of them, the thief Lupin was no different from a monster, and the 2 detectives still thought that 2 of them for one case was overkill, but they continued investigating. By the time of the plot, Lupin had sent a letter announcing that between 11 and 11:15 on the 19th, he would come to steal the diamond called the Penultimate Night. The reason for this name was that the diamond was black, which was extremely valuable and had never been exhibited, being a piece that had always been kept in a fortified basement below the mansion surrounded by a large moat. It turned out that to the south of the mansion there was a normal canal and an underground canal big enough for one person to enter. Sherlock asked for the whole area to be closed off, and the diamond was now being protected by more than 100 guards and policemen, along with 2 detectives and 2 representatives of an insurance cooperative that had only been in existence for a year. According to Lupin's investigation, the cooperative had 7 super skilled members who would do anything to protect their customers. These representatives wore white clothes and were incredibly efficient. The first to arrive to protect Iron Man was Representative number 5 Reynold, then Representative number 7 arrived. Her name is Fatima, probably a member of the channel. As everyone arrived, Aya recognized that Reynold would be the person who would get in the way of her investigation the most, since he clearly disliked Aya, and Shin since they are not human. Iron Man then took everyone down to the basement to show them the room containing the diamond. This place required 3 keys and 4 people to open the door, and the penultimate night was kept in a super elaborately designed safe. However, the diamond was only a synthetic product and didn't really have much financial value. Aya noticed that the safe was made of silver, a metal that both vampires and werewolves avoided, so she concluded that this diamond must have a very interesting history. It turns out that 20 years ago, a friend of this Iron Man found a diamond in a relic from the 16th century. He put the diamond in a safe and gave it to Iron Man, who took 10 years to unravel the sophisticated safe mechanism and recover the diamond. On the surface of the diamond there were inscriptions that Aya translated, specifically mentioning werewolf. After investigating the origin of the diamond, Iron Man discovered that in southern Germany there was a very prosperous tribe of dwarves who were completely exterminated by a tribe of werewolves. The dwarves were so resentful that in order to take revenge they left their descendants the location of the enemy's hideout by means of an unbreakable diamond kept in a silver cup which the werewolves couldn't touch. Now back in the room, in addition to the locks mentioned, the place had a microphone for communicating with the outside world, and a spiral air vent in the ceiling blocked by an iron mesh to ensure that humans couldn't get through. With that, exploring the place was considered enough for now. Before leaving, Sherlock whispered something to Iron Man, and Shin asked Aya if she had any idea how to deal with Lupin, and she replied that she had a plan in mind. On the afternoon of January 19th, Shin's group went to sit by the river, and Aya said she wanted to visit a wax museum. So Shizuku went to get information with the help of a map. Meanwhile, Watson's assistant and Sherlock's brother realized that the person sitting in front of them was not Sherlock. They noticed this because this person's nails were too long and Sherlock Holmes' real nails were short. So the real Sherlock appeared behind them, and the person unmasked himself, revealing himself to be the master thief Lupin. Shin's group, who were following the map to the museum, decided to say hello to Sherlock, but realized that Aya had disappeared. Unfortunately, Shin ended up taking someone else's cage by mistake and was punched by Shizuku as a result. At that point, Lupin declared that there wasn't a lock in the world he couldn't break. He jumped into a car driven by a ghost and fled, almost running over Shizuku while she was saying that she was looking for a bird cage. Lupin invited her to get in the car and continue the search with him. Along the way, Shin accidentally bumped into Annie, and they also decided to join the search. At his brother's house, Sherlock warned him to be careful with the insurance representatives, as he had the impression that they were unreliable. However, it was Shin and Aya's group who got in the way the most, as the penultimate night was the key to tracking down the werewolf tribe. That's why they might not be able to prevent the diamond from being stolen, and might even try to steal it themselves. Meanwhile, the person who took Aya's cage by mistake realized his mistake, and when he saw it he was so frightened that he threw the cage into the street, causing Aya to be hit by a car. To make matters worse, the car she hit belonged to the criminal twins who had escaped from the police, and they had plans for Aya ever since they first saw her. Just then Shizuku arrived and saw Aya in the twins' car, so she veered off to chase them. Annie and Shin were searching nearby when they spotted Aya and Shizuku and started following them too. Shin jumped to the rooftops and went straight down to where the twins were. He managed to rescue Aya and return her to the Cade. Lupin recognized the group as the messengers from the Cade, while Shin recognized Lupin as he was wearing an outfit identical to Sherlock's. Shin quickly introduced himself using his famous nickname as the Demon Killer, and this name implied that he was stronger than Lupin, which made Lupin want to play with him. Lupin threw marbles on the ground and slid over them to attack Shin. The two wrestled and danced in the air for a while before returning to the ground. In the midst of these events, Shin was hit on the forehead by a marble, and as a result of his failure, he was punched in the middle of his jaw and fainted. That done, Lupin warned Aya's group to stay away from this subject, but he didn't know that all this was within her calculation. So they got close to the big moment, with the clock striking exactly 8 o'clock, and everyone having to go through a search before entering Iron Man's mansion. When the French inspector arrived, Sherlock tugged at his beard to make sure he wasn't Lupin in disguise before greeting him and taking him inside. When they entered the room, A's group had left a letter for Sherlock saying that they would be responsible for security there. Sherlock ignored it, thinking that only monsters understand what monsters think. Reynold refused to stay in this dusty room and also demanded to keep watch on the floor. Sherlock knew that this was to make it easier to catch Lupin, so he let him do it. So only 6 people remained in the room, and there were still 3 hours to go. Even so, everyone decided to close the door early. Everyone sat around the silver cup, waiting to see what Lupin would do. At 10 o'clock, there was suddenly an explosion in the pit below, and on hearing rumors that an officer's uniform had been stolen, Sherlock immediately drew his gun and shot all the locks, rendering them useless. Now this room was completely locked, and no one could get in or out. Even if a locksmith was called in, it would take about 5 hours to pick the lock. Sherlock had this idea because Lupin had claimed that he could steal any lock, but that wouldn't be a problem if the lock itself couldn't be opened in the first place. The people around who heard this began to think that Sherlock really was a genius. At 11:55, as there were still no signs of trouble, Iron Man suggested that Sherlock and Watson get their hands on the safe. At 11:10, the room began to shake. The previous explosion caused water from the faucet to enter through the air vent, and Sherlock realized that he wasn't as clever as he thought. He had been manipulated by Lupin, which had led him to make the decision to destroy the locks. Now there was no way they could escape. When Reynolds learned that there were people trapped in the basement, he sent Pantam to rescue them while he kept an eye on Lupin downstairs. Those who knew the local structure well were sure that the water couldn't completely fill the room, so they weren't panicking yet. Their plan was to cling to the statues on the ceiling when the water rose. At this point in the plot, Pantam had arrived to steal the door and help them escape. However, when all the water had drained away, the safe had indeed disappeared, and the exact time was 11:30. No one knew how Lupin had stolen the safe, although it was clear that it wasn't possible to enter or leave the room freely. They wanted to warm up first before going to think about what to do next. But when they returned to the fireplace and started planning, Sherlock borrowed handcuffs from the French inspector and handcuffed him. Sherlock knew he was Lupin in disguise because when he walked on the bridge, his footsteps didn't cause the bridge to creak, so his beer belly was a fake. Lupin then immediately confessed that the way he had stolen the safe was by passing a rope through the running water and inside the room. He tied the rope to the safe so that his accomplices could remove it. Lupin took off his mask, but was still confident that there was something to be solved. Yes, it turned out that the safe didn't contain the diamond because Sherlock had changed its location, and the real diamond was well guarded. But when they looked, the diamond was no longer there. Lupin managed to keep it in his hand and used a smoke bomb to escape. Now the whole mansion was in chaos. Everyone was looking for Lupin, but he had escaped wearing a stolen guard's uniform. Lupin was described as a thief similar to a character from Japanese legend known as Ishikawa Gomen. He was caught and executed, so his followers were furious and decided to steal all the pots in the world. The restaurants faced the biggest problem as they ended up running out of pans for their businesses. Meanwhile, Lupin and the ghost met again, one with a diamond and the other with a safe, but what was in the safe was actually nothing. According to Shin, the way they caught the pot thieves was with someone sitting inside to travel, and now they used a similar method to deal with Lupin. After finishing the story, Shin bowed, and they revealed that Lupin had mistaken and for her at that moment, so she encouraged Shin to lose to make Lupin more confident. At dusk, she found Iron Man and asked him to hide her inside the vault. She had to keep the vault tightly closed the whole time she was hidden to wait for that moment, and that wasn't a problem for her, as she is immortal. Lupin knew that he had been exposed, but he was confident that his ghost would take care of Shin, but the ghost had run away, forcing Shizuko to chase him. Reynolds also arrived and demanded to deal with everyone at once, but suddenly the bridge outside was destroyed, leaving them with no escape routes. However, it wasn't Lupin who had destroyed the bridge, but the man carrying the M-shaped staff. The members of his group were all non-human creatures, and he only wanted the diamond, so how everyone would be treated was up to them. They then split up to massacre everyone. Reynolds attacked Lupin but also aimed at Shin. He had to dodge and use Lupin's escape as a distraction to avoid Reynolds' attack. In the meantime, Shin chased Lupin and demanded that he return the diamond, so to throw Reynolds off, Lupin ended up throwing the diamond away, forcing Reynolds to chase after it while Shin continued his pursuit. Meanwhile, Sherlock and Dr. Watson arrived and learned about the confusion from A. And after hearing about the attack by a mysterious group, Aya asked Sherlock to take her along as she believed his knowledge could help in this case. At another point, Phantom, who had managed to escape from Shizuko, ended up meeting another Phantom, and he was being chased because his name was on a list of targets that needed to be eliminated. The Phantom drew 2 crossbows and forced the other Phantom to reveal his face, and even though he tried to hide, it didn't help as the Phantom kept firing straight arrows. Meanwhile, Sherlock and Aya arrived at the library where several people had been massacred. Sherlock recognized the person responsible. He was Alistair, a person famous for having recently been involved in fanatical cults that performed brutal rituals all over London. He soon realized the finger-snapping trick, which was actually used to throw a poison needle, and realizing that Sherlock and Aya had discovered his trick, Alistair decided to eliminate them. Elsewhere, a French inspector accidentally bumped into a vampire woman. She wasn't intimidated by his weak weapon, but before he could be attacked, Shizuko showed up to help. However, Shizuko was still focused on her mission to find the Phantom, and when she asked the vampire if she knew anything, the answer was negative, so Shizuko decided to leave. But she was stopped by the vampire, who decided to attack her. Meanwhile, the chase between Reynolds, Lupin, and Shin continued. The three of them ended up on the outskirts of a church, and in the middle of the confusion, the diamond fell inside. At this point, Lupin suggested that he and Shin cooperate, but Reynolds showed up, and Shin began to distract him with his small talk, taking advantage of the situation as Lupin dropped an entire piano on Reynolds' head. On the other hand, Phantom began to use the darkness to his advantage to trick the other Phantom, who was already extremely skilled at manipulating sound, and this made it difficult for the Phantom to locate him and make an effective attack. Shizuko, for her part, was losing ground in the fight against the immortal vampire, and although she had silver weapons that could hurt her, the problem was actually managing to hit her. To make matters worse, what Shizuko didn't expect was that the vampire's blood was poisonous, and after being wounded, Shizuko was contaminated by the poison and ended up under the vampire's spell. Meanwhile, Sherlock, after a magical firefight, began to run out of ammunition. I seized the moment to ask why there was such a rush for the diamond. The enemies then explained that they needed the artifact to locate werewolves and increase their power. During the conversation, Sherlock used his cane to knock over a needle that was pointed at him and managed to get an antidote. Just then, however, Alistair's mentor appeared. Sherlock recognized him as none other than Professor Moriarty. Elsewhere, Shin was still trying to survive, but Reynolds was still alive. Suddenly, the Ghost and Phantom landed in the same place along with another member of the Professor's group. This new member used magic to steal the diamond and quickly got rid of the two insurance representatives. Realizing that they had no chance of recovering the diamond, Lupin and Phantom decided to run away. Aya was shocked to hear the name Moriarty. He was known as the leader of a criminal organization that should have died out years ago. But as it turned out, Moriarty had survived and had spent the last 8 years creating an even more powerful gang, gathering supernatural beings, and even hiring an unexpected ally. This ally was none other than Jack the Ripper, who was now face to face with Shin. During the conversation, Shin realized that Jack was very similar to him in some ways. Moriarty then explained that he and Jack had gone to Japan in search of species of demons and immortal people. The aim was to transplant cells from demons and immortals to create powerful warriors with incredible regeneration. Moriarty said that he used Aya's body as the basis for his experiment. He discovered that her body was actually a hybrid with demon cells, and Aya confirmed this, saying that she hated the person who had given her this immortality. Now, with the success of the experiments, Moriarty made Jack immune to the side effects of the demon cell and began using his body to make new implants. Jack now possessed vampire characteristics, but without the silver and sunlight weakness. Now he also sought to acquire the abilities of werewolves, becoming a practically invincible creature, an immortal Noid with demonic powers, vampiric regeneration, and absurd strength. But even with all that, Jack had a weak point, which was Shin himself. And although he defeated Shin with brute force, his blows still managed to cause injuries that hindered Jack's regeneration. That's when Jack recognized Shin as the specimen that escaped from Moriarty. On the other hand, Shin remembered Jack as the man who always accompanied Moriarty. Shin revealed that he had chased Moriarty and his gang there for one purpose only, to confront them. On hearing this, Jack decided to ignore Shin instead of trying to kill him, at least for the time being. On the other side of the screen, the vampire was trying to seduce Shizuko, and in one swift movement, Shizuko grabbed a crucifix that was nearby and used it to stab her, causing the vampire intense pain and making her furious, wanting to finish Shizuko off immediately. Before the situation could get any worse, Jack set off a flare, indicating that it was time for everyone to get out of there. The professor, realizing that Jack had gotten what he wanted, called Alistair and Franken to leave as well. Before leaving, he revealed the name of the organization he was creating, called Night Fist. Shin, on the other hand, ended up reuniting with Sherlock, Aya, and the rest of the group. Shizuko also returned safely, and no one knew where Lupin had fled to, but Sherlock deduced that he had used the sewers as the water in the moat had partially drained, allowing him to escape. As for the safe, Lupin had apparently taken the opportunity to steal it. However, Shin stated that he wanted everyone to watch his next move. Meanwhile, Jack returned to the organization with a diamond in hand, ready to show it to the teacher. But before he knew it, his clothes were torn, and Shin had managed to grab the diamond quickly. Aya, for her part, decoded the poem related to the object. She asked Sherlock to hold the diamond against the light, which he did, and a line of text appeared inside the crystal, revealing that the so-called Fong Forest seemed to be where the werewolves lived. Shin remembered something similar that Jack had done, suggesting that the Night Fist organization might also already have this information. Years ago, two werewolves, a mother and son, were hunted by villagers. To protect themselves, they hid in a tower, but the villagers set fire to the place and tried to kill them. In the present, Aya's group set off for the Fong Forest, located in southern Germany. Aya warned the group to be careful, as they could be ambushed by members of Moriarty's organization. She also shared her previous experience with werewolves. They could transform into three forms. The first, the human form, in which they were practically normal human beings. The second, the man-beast form, where they had slightly superior abilities, and in full wolf form, their senses were highly enhanced, and their skin became so resistant that ordinary shots had no effect. Suddenly, while walking, the group came across a bearded man. He recognized Aya and the other detectives investigating monsters and begged for help, explaining that a girl from the village had been taken by a werewolf. When they arrived at the village, they noticed that the locals were avoiding them. They asked the man to tell her the story. He said that a year ago, the village chief's granddaughter was taken and found dead in the forest the next day. Her body was in horrible condition. Her head and back were broken, her face was mutilated, one arm was completely torn off, and her body was full of bite marks. 4 months later, the miller's daughter was the next victim, found in equally terrible conditions. Then another 4 months passed, and the flour mill owner's daughter was killed in a similar way. All these attacks took place on rainy nights. Now, the day before, another girl had been taken, but this time it hadn't rained. The girl's father broke down the door to try and save her, but the culprit escaped through the window with her. It was said that 8 years ago, the villagers had driven the werewolves out of the village before anything like this happened. Now, at the church, the father of the missing girl accused a stranger of being a werewolf, but there were 3 outsiders in the village, making it difficult to support this accusation. Aya and the group arrived at the scene of the crime, and she asked no one to look at the state of the missing girl, but the curious couldn't resist and were shocked by what they saw. The girl's father called Aya a monster, but ended up accepting her help because she was the only one who could solve the case. Upon investigating the scene, they realized that everything was very messy. The fireplace hadn't been used the night before, indicating that the culprit had broken in. Based on the size of the footprints and the clues, she deduced that the culprit was in the form of a beast man. So, they asked the bearded man to bring back the teeth marks from the previous bodies and asked Shizuku to find a ball the size of a head. Afterwards, she asked the girl's mother what they had done the night before, and the woman explained that they had followed their normal routine and that one of the windows was locked while the other, which was broken, had recently been repaired and couldn't be opened, thus making the culprit's escape route clear. Shizuku arrived with the ball and climbed onto the roof to look for tracks but found nothing. Aya asked her to throw something on the ground, raising a cloud of dust. The bearded man brought the teeth marks, and Aya concluded that the culprit was not an uncontrolled werewolf, but someone acting with full reason. There was blood on the bed but not on the escape route, suggesting that the culprit had taken the girl in a bag. In addition, the lock on the storage room was broken. This same warehouse had been broken into a year ago when weapons and ammunition were stolen, coinciding with the first attack, and this connection needed to be considered. The whole group went to the house of the village chief, who had more information about the forest where the werewolves supposedly lived. He also knew about the German Tia, and they decided to negotiate with him. She would solve the wolf case in exchange for information. According to the village chief, there were 3 suspicious outsiders: a doctor, an engineer, and an artist. They were all outsiders. To identify werewolves, they used to use scented flowers or knock on pots near their ears, as their senses were extremely acute. However, the 3 showed no reaction to the test. Werewolves can control their blood, their reproduction, and their characteristics, which has meant that modern werewolves no longer fear silver and holy water. So now, the only way to eliminate a werewolf is to kill it in its human form. But if the werewolf king is born, all conventional methods will become ineffective. The werewolf king is a legend about werewolves who end up giving birth to an individual considered to be a god of the werewolf clan. He had already seen werewolves immune to silver in the past. A werewolf mother and son had come to the village and deceived everyone, but fortunately, the little girl Louise, who had just been kidnapped, discovered them and helped drive the werewolves out of the village. Since then, the girl had been considered the guardian deity of the village, and it was a shame that now the girl had also been kidnapped by an unidentified culprit. To find out more, the group of messengers went to the engineer's house because some 13 years ago, he had found a pregnant and injured woman deep in the forest. He learned that the girl's name was Rosa, and he thought she was a servant from some family who had an affair with the boss and was expelled. At that time, the villagers were quite tolerant, so he took her home. Half a year later, she gave birth to a daughter called Judd. Rosa lived mainly at home and was an intelligent and religious person. Their life was peaceful until one day. Due to their similar appearance, Rosa mistook Louise for her daughter and revealed her identity as a werewolf. The villagers burned the mother and children alive, and the engineer himself confirmed the two skeletons of the werewolf mother and child. The engineer trusted the doctor, so there was only one suspect left, the female artist. The group of detectives then went to the artist's house. 5 years ago, she came here to paint waterfalls, and as the landscape was very beautiful, she had stayed here ever since. The parents of the victims asked her to paint portraits in memory of their children, and in the artist's opinion, the culprit seemed to be just a wild wolf. Occasionally, early in the morning or at sunset, she had seen a wolf with a golden coat. Only she saw the wolf because she lived on the outskirts of the village, so now she too had become the main suspect. It wasn't clear whether this artist was guilty or not, but Aya knew that she lied about living in a family of artists and graduating from art school. The way she held the pen was different from that of a real artist. So, I noticed she had to explain that, as she was now an orphan and often discriminated against. She lied to avoid embarrassment, as she had been abandoned since childhood. While the group of detectives were busy investigating where the engineer had found Rosa, the Night Fist group were watching them from afar. At night, it was at the doctor's house, and it was he who heard Louise's scream at the very moment she was taken away. Suddenly, I wondered how Louise's parents treated the girl because she had seen Louise's wheelchair. The wheels and armrests were dirty, but the handles on the back were extremely clean. Louise had also learned to be independent, so perhaps Louise's parents didn't mind her at all. I asked if Louise ever went out on her own, and the answer was mostly no, but he remembered that about a year and a half ago, Louise had gone missing, and it was only at dusk that the locals discovered her wheelchair stuck in a pile of mud on the riverbank, preventing her from moving. When they asked her why she had gone out alone, the girl said she wanted to go to the artist's house. I now understood the situation in the village better, until suddenly, 2 guests came to visit her. They started fighting immediately, and the 2 who came were numbers 3 and 4 from the insurance organization. They had come here to find the werewolf, but now, even if they stole the diamond, they didn't know how to use it. Shin revealed that only the village chief knew how to use it and promised to tell A if she managed to solve the case. The 2 sides decided to cease fire, and number 3 wanted Aya to resolve the case quickly. Aya then had to continue treating Shin and noticed that Shizuko seemed to be jealous of him. Suddenly, she discovered the villagers running to surround the artist's house. The artist shouted for everyone to stay away and confessed that she was guilty of eating all the victims. Then she turned into a wolf and ran off. Number 3 fired a silver bullet, but it had no effect, and she escaped. The group of detectives chased and fought with the female artist. Shin handed Aya over to Shizuko for safekeeping and entered the fray. Numbers 3 and 4 also arrived and fired a few shots, and when Shizuko went to help, the female artist dodged and ran to throw Aya into the stream. Shizuko threw herself forward, pushing Aya back and letting herself fall into the waterfall. Although the culprit escaped, the village chief agreed to share how to use the diamond. His words were as follows: "Go to the entrance of the village, stand where the burnt tower is, and wait for the sunlight to shine through, using the first letter of the poem engraved on the diamond to get results." The insurance group followed these instructions and revealed the location of the werewolf village in the forest. Meanwhile, the Night Fist group, seeing what was happening, also got ready. By this point, Shizuko had regained consciousness. She had washed into the river below and was rescued by a werewolf named Nora, who asked 2 close friends to warm her up, helping her overcome her critical state. Shizuko noticed that this werewolf village had a completely opposite lifestyle to that of the humans. From midday until the middle of the night, they all slept. The werewolves didn't allow humans into the village, so Shizuko needed to get out as quickly as possible. But she also discovered that in the village, there was a case of serial murder in which the victims were girls on rainy days, and as the weapon used on the bodies of her victims was not hers, they believed that she was not the culprit. Shizuko wanted them to wait for A to arrive, as she could solve this case, but the more people who entered the village, the harder it would be to discover the truth. So, Nora thought it best for Shizuko to leave. She made tea for the 3 werewolves to drink, and they all complimented the tea, and Shizuko became curious about the case. She learned that it had started a year ago, with deaths occurring every 4 months, and now there were 3 victims. The victims died of a gunshot wound to the chest, and the men of the village were never able to follow the culprit's trail because the rain erased all clues. Every time, no one heard the sound of gunfire. Until now, they knew that the culprit used a firearm, was very good at ambushes, and knew how to erase his tracks perfectly. However, Shizuko couldn't investigate anything on her own, so they wanted to get her out of there. They needed to find a place with water to help her erase her scent, and Nora would lure the men away so that the 2 friends could find a way to get Shizuko out. On the way, Shizuko learned that no girl in the village could run away because she would be captured by the men. All the girls would be forced by the village chief to become priestesses in order to improve the race. Suddenly, the men appeared, and the 2 girls had to pretend to be calm in front of them. When they got through, a small mistake revealed Shizuko's identity among the werewolves. She was chased and ended up being surrounded by a large number of people. She said she needed to defend herself, so that the 2 girls wouldn't be punished, and then a village elder appeared and wanted to deal with Shizuko immediately. But the 2 girls argued that Nora had saved Shizuko, and they wanted to hear what she had to say. They took her to a wooden hill to interrogate her, and the judgment would be made by the village elder. The wooden hill had been built a long time ago since Rose's case, and now no matter what Shizuko said, the village elder still thought she was lying. The 2 girls also spoke up in Shizuko's defense, and suddenly, in the middle of the trial, everyone heard the sound of a gunshot. The whole clan rushed into the forest and found Nora dead, shot, and although it wasn't raining, they still couldn't find any trace of the culprit. The elder blamed Shizuko again, but the men said that she had been on the wooden hill the whole time, so how could she have done it? The werewolves didn't know what to do, so they let Shizuko examine the scene. There was very little blood around, so Shizuko deduced that this was not where the culprit had acted. Nora's body was wet, but her clothes were dry, which meant that she had gotten wet somewhere else before putting on her clothes. And then she was shot, and her body was moved to the scene. There was a shot mark on a nearby tree, which indicated that 2 shots had been fired, but only one had made a sound. Seeing that Shizuko couldn't help much, the men decided to deal with her, as they wouldn't let anyone else into the village. Elsewhere, Aya's group was moving when they were suddenly attacked by Franken. He pulled Shin and Aya over a cliff and cut off the insurance group. Franken then informed them that he had helped them get rid of the insurance group, so he wanted the location of the werewolf village in return. And now, even though he knew the location, Franken still feared that Shin was lying, so he demanded the diamond as collateral, promising to return it if they met at the werewolf village. After that, they both went their separate ways, and Shin and Aya arrived at the werewolf village, which was holding a funeral for Nora. With the help of the werewolves, Shin and Aya found Shizuko in prison. Aya asked about the results of Shizuko's investigation and praised her for her good work. The men smelled them and decided to check out the prison, and to avoid chaos, Shizuko decided to stay in prison for the time being, while Shin took Aya to investigate the crime scene. Soon, the werewolves caught their scent and started chasing them. Aya asked Shin to go around a sharp rock so that she could watch. Aya helped Shin find a switch, and they both managed to get into a tunnel before the werewolves caught up with them, which was exactly how the culprit hid his tracks after each crime. There was still blood on the spot, and the culprit's gun was there too, so the victims must have been killed there and their bodies brought to the surface. A recognized the gun as the same one Louise's father had lost in the warehouse. Moving on, they discovered a trail of Nora's blood in a lake in one corner. It looked like no one had ever been there, and on the wall, there was a carved schedule. They needed to dig deeper to find out more. Meanwhile, someone in the human village accidentally discovered Louise's body. The group of detectives found the artist's body next to a tunnel leading to the human village. Now Aya understood that Rosa had used this tunnel to reach the human village years ago. They both found their doctor uncle again and learned that Louise's body had been found. When they met Louise's parents, Aya asked how they had treated Louise before she became the guardian deity. At the time, Louise was seen as a burden because she couldn't walk on her own. 8 years ago, Louise's parents intended to abandon her. They left her in the forest, but unexpectedly, Jay, Rose's daughter, brought Louise back to the village that very night. Louise then exposed the identity of her mother and her werewolf daughter. That same night, basically, Louise was abandoned, Jay saved Louise, and then Louise betrayed Jay in order to prove herself useful to the village and not be abandoned. Louise was very clever because if she hadn't exposed Jay's identity, the villagers would have investigated and discovered that her parents had tried to abandon her. I began to understand the situation and decided to return to the werewolf village once again. They both used the tunnel to return, and on the way, they searched through something. Numbers 3 and 4 also discovered the tunnel and decided to alert the whole village. The vampire had entered the village and started to corrupt it. Shin's group had already freed Shizuko from prison, and Aya wanted to go back to the village because there was still more to clear up. She asked the werewolf again if it was true that the villagers lived at night and lived apart. Even after the confirmation, she assigned Shin to distract the werewolves. When the men learned that Shizuko had escaped, they began to act. At the same time, Franken and Alistair, on hearing the howl, also moved immediately. Shin discovered that 3 werewolves were chasing him. He defeated them one by one using clever tactics. Aya had already arrived at the werewolf clan cemetery to find her final clue. At the same time, the werewolf village was suddenly set on fire. Numbers 3 and 4 led the villagers to take revenge on the werewolves. The 3 Night Fist members began to massacre the werewolves. Aya asked the werewolves to dig up Nora's body so that she could examine it, and while this was happening, Shizuko was ordered to go back and help the werewolves. Shizuko returned and found the remaining werewolves, but ended up running into the vampire. Number 4 now faced Franken and began a verbal duel. Number 3 confronted the magician, and after a while, he had understood the whole matter and was ready to return to the village and explain everything. Meanwhile, the other 2 were fighting. Number 4 chained Franken up, but Shin showed up to help Franken. Unfortunately, Number 4 was very skilled with chains, which made it difficult for Shin to deal with them. Seeing Shin in trouble, Franken tore off his own arm and threw it at Shin, who kicked it to knock out the young man who had arrived. Franken demanded that the diamond be returned and asked about Aya's body. It was then discovered that it was still being preserved in the Night Fist nest in London. Meanwhile, Number 3 and Alistair were still fighting from a distance, and Number 3 threw a shovel up and fired at an angle, managing to hit Alistair with a ricochet. It was at this point that the vampire realized that Shizuko wasn't wearing any underwear, but she preferred not to comment on this. The vampire informed Shizuko that as she had already been exposed to his venom, she now had antibodies in her body. Shizuko wasn't sure if this was true, so the vampire gave her a small mark on her leg, and Shizuko fell under the spell again. But then the vampire informed her that he had been telling the truth, and that it was just an illusion. The vampire then left, sparing Shizuko this time. On the other side, Number 3 thought he had defeated Alistair, but he had switched bodies and gave him a needle. Meanwhile, Shin and Aya went to meet Shizuko again. Shin wanted to solve the case, but Aya had something else for him to do outside. The people of the 2 villages were preparing for a general fight, and finally, Aya arrived and asked everyone to stop. She announced that she had found the culprit in both cases. The perpetrator was right on the wooden hill, which was both Louise and Nora, none other than Rosa and Jay's daughter. Returning to the crime scene, or the room where Louise was caught, the evidence showed that no one had entered the room, but there were traces of someone jumping out of the window in the shape of a wolf. The footprints in the fireplace should have been covered in dust if someone had come in through the chimney, but the area was all clean, so it could only have been staged. When Aya heard that Jay and Louise looked alike, she suspected that the Jay from the past was still alive. That night, the artist who turned into a wolf was actually Jay in disguise because the teeth marks on Shin's leg matched those of all the cases in the human village. And from the looks of it, the artist was killed right after she and Shin left the investigation. As for Nora's body found last night, she was actually killed in the cave because if humans were passing through there, they would need a lamp, and lamps attract moths down there. And only werewolves can walk in the dark without getting dirty with dust and moths. So Nora's body was also created by Jay. The person who lived in the cave and was shot dead by Jay was quite short and had lived there for a year and a half, coinciding with the period when Louise disappeared before. Therefore, Aya was sure that the person killed last night was Louise and not the Nora they knew, because both beings were very similar. In short, years ago, Jay was helped by Rosa to escape to the werewolf village and changed her name to Nora, but also played the role of Louise to live in the human village. In total, there are 5 reasons for Aya to say this. Firstly, the 2 villages hardly interacted with each other. Secondly, the tunnel helped Jay take a little over an hour between the 2 villages. Thirdly, the living hours of the 2 villages were opposite. Fourthly, Louise usually had little interaction with the village, and Nora lived alone, so no one would recognize them. Fifthly, there was a lake in the tunnel, which helped Jay to erase her scent, allowing her to switch between her two identities. When they returned to the human village, Louise's body was discovered. Jay had dug up Louise's dead and chaotically torn body and then hidden the bullet wound. In other words, the fact that Jay was alive was what was really causing the problems in both the werewolf and human villages. A thought that Jay had become too obsessed with revenge because 13 years ago, Rosa had escaped from the werewolf village, gone to the human village, and several months later, the name Jay was born. After living for some time, they were discovered by Louise, who exposed her identity, causing them both to burn to death. But Jay survived and managed to escape to the werewolf village. The small skeleton found was that of a fox in the tower, and Jay, who had come here, changed her name to Nora but still hated that village, so she planned to create a conflict between the two villages. Then, a year and a half ago, Jay kidnapped Louise, but Louise also hated the village, so she agreed to help Jay get revenge. So Jay lived with two identities and gathered information. A year ago, she caused back-to-back murders to increase the hostility between the two villages and staged events to cover her tracks. But when the group of detectives arrived, things started to go wrong. Jay had chosen the artist to frame and then fled, so she saved Shizuko and deliberately planned for Shizuko to be exposed. And while the whole village was being interrogated, Jay went to the tunnel, killed Louise, and brought the body there to create a fake crime scene. She shot at the tree to help Shizuko not be suspected as the culprit, and when everyone thought she was dead, she had gone to dig up Louise's body to take it back to the human village, and then opened a hidden path to bring the two villages into conflict. But Jay thought it was screwed. She then went out and found Shin in the tunnel. He was waiting there to catch her, but she revealed that it was actually the werewolf king. So she blew out the candles to ambush him, but he managed to knock her into the lake and tied her up while her fur was swollen. Aya arrived and reported that the two villages had sorted things out. Aya now wanted Shin to free Jay because she had reasoned incorrectly. Jay didn't carry out the plan out of revenge, but to free the women from the cruel fate set by the village elder. The fact that she was both the Wolf King and a woman made it difficult for anyone to imagine what her fate would be later on, so she wanted to free people like her from this cruel fate and help them escape. She was suddenly reusing corpses from the human side to fake deaths on the werewolf side. She saved 3 people, sacrificing another 3, and because she had come to the wrong conclusion, Aya promised to let her go, and if there was a chance, they should meet again. Aya felt that this was the first time she had been wrong and let a criminal go. She knew that the two villages had learned their own lessons, but she was sure that nothing would change.